Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are looking at something that, well, it explains why your Thanksgiving dinner arguments never seem to go anywhere.
Right.
We're looking at the invisible structures that determine how we think, how we vote, and honestly, how we understand reality itself.
And we're doing that by diving into a modern classic of cognitive science and political theory, Don't Think of an Elephant, by George Lakoff. This book's been around for a couple of decades, originally published in 2004, updated in 2014. But I have to say, reading it now feels like finding the schematic for a machine we've all been stuck inside for 20 years.
It really does. The core systemic question Lakoff poses is deceptively simple, but the answer is incredibly complex.
Which is?
He asks, how does language and cognitive framing determine political perception before a single fact is even weighed?
And that is the frustrating part, isn't it? I mean, we all tend to think that if we just show people the data, if we just lay out the spreadsheets, the economic graphs, the climate charts, they'll come to the rational conclusion. But Lakoff says essentially, stop. You are getting the science of the human brain completely wrong.
Exactly. He tackles what he calls the Enlightenment myth of rationality. This is the old view, and frankly, the view that a lot of political strategists, particularly on the liberal side, still cling to, that people are rational actors.
Right. The idea that we're all just calculating machines.
We think that if you give people the raw facts, they will calculate their self-interest, like a computer, and vote accordingly. Lakoff, as a cognitive scientist, argues that this is just scientifically incorrect. That's simply not how our neural circuitry works.
So we've essentially been bringing a calculator to a knife fight for the last 40 years.
That is a very, very apt way to put it. And that brings us to the stakes of this deep dive. We aren't looking at this book to decide which political party is right or wrong in terms of policy.
No, we're not taking sides here.
Not at all. We're looking at the mechanics. We want to understand why political discourse isn't failing because of a lack of evidence. It's failing at the level of moral framing and actual physical neural structure.
Okay, so we are going to look under the hood. We're going to see how frames work, why facts literally bounce off them if the frame isn't there to catch them, and how specific metaphors like the nation as a family are actually running the software of our society. But first, give us a little background. Who is George Lakoff? Is he like a campaign manager, a pollster?
No, and that's why his perspective is so unique. Lakoff is a professor of cognitive linguistics. He spent years at UC Berkeley.
So he's an academic?
He is. His primary work isn't political campaigning. It's studying how the neural circuitry of the brain gives rise to thought and language. He studies metaphors not as, poetic devices you use in a creative writing class, but as the fundamental way our brains grasp complex concepts.
And he wrote this book specifically to solve a mystery.
A mystery that still baffles people today.
Which is?
Why do people often vote against their own economic self-interest? Why do lists of facts fail to persuade anyone? Lakoff looked at the landscape, specifically the gap between the 1960s and the early 2000s, and he saw this massive asymmetry.
Asymmetry in what way?
He points out that for about 40 or 50 years, conservatives had invested billions in what he calls framing infrastructure.
Framing infrastructure? You mean like billboards and TV ads?
No, much deeper than that. Yeah. Think tanks, professorships, media training, law reviews. They were building a system to define the very language of the debate.
Okay.
Meanwhile, progressives were largely relying on that Enlightenment myth we mentioned.
The idea that the truth will set you free.
Exactly. They just thought the facts spoke for themselves.
And Lakoff's central thesis is that facts never speak for themselves.
Correct. People think with frames, and frames are these deep mental structures, physically instantiated in the synapses of our brain. And here is the crucial part. If the facts do not fit the frame, the facts bounce off. The frame stays.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because frame is a word that gets thrown around a lot in, marketing and PR. But Lakoff gets very specific about the biological mechanics. And the first insight, the one the book is named after, is the trap of negation.
Hence the title, Don't Think of an Elephant.
Right. If I tell you, whatever you do, listener, do not think of an elephant, what happens?
You immediately see it. Large ears, a trunk, gray skin. You can't help it.
It's automatic.
It is. To negate a concept, your brain first has to activate the neural circuitry for that concept. You have to conjure the image to know what not to think of.
It's like telling someone, don't look down. When they're on a ladder, they look down immediately. But how does this play out in a debate? Because usually if someone accuses you of something, your first instinct is to say, I didn't do that.
And that is the trap. In the political sphere, this has massive systemic consequences. Lakoff uses the famous example of Richard Nixon saying, "I am not a crook."
And immediately everyone thinks of him as a crook.
Yeah.
That's all anyone remembers.
Because he activated the crook frame. He strengthened the neural connection between Nixon and crook, even while trying to deny it.
Wow.
Lakoff argues that when you argue against an opponent using their language, even to say they are wrong, you are physically strengthening the synapses in the listener's brain that hold your opponent's worldview.
So if a politician says, I am not for tax relief for the rich, they've already lost.
Yes, because they use the phrase tax relief. They've accepted the premise that taxation is an affliction that requires relief. We'll get deep into tax relief frame later, but the mechanism is clear. Repetition strengthens the synapse. By repeating the opponent's frame, even to deny it, you reinforce it. You are fighting on their terrain.
This leads us to probably the most detailed and honestly the most mind-bending part of the book for me. It's this idea that we understand the entire nation through the lens of the family.
This is the core of his systems analysis. He asked himself a really interesting question. Why do certain political positions hang together?
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. Why does someone who opposes gun control also tend to support tort reform? Or why does someone who supports environmental protection also support social safety nets? Logically, those issues aren't connected.
Right. There's no logical reason why your stance on abortion should dictate your stance on capital gains tax.
None at all.
That's true. I've always just assumed it's tribalism. You know, you pick a team, you wear the jersey.
Lakoff says it's deeper than tribalism. It's metaphorical consistency. We understand the complex thing, the nation, through the lens of something simple we all know, the family. We're all born into families, so that is our primary reference point for authority, for morality, for care.
And he identifies two primary models, right?
Yes, the strict father and the nurturant parent.
Okay, let's break these down because I think this explains so much of the culture war confusion. Let's start with the strict father model. This is usually associated with conservative politics. What is the logic here?
In the strict father model, the world is viewed as inherently dangerous and competitive. There is evil in the world, and there will always be winners and losers.
It's a tough world out there.
Exactly. And in this model, children, or by extension citizens, are born bad, or at least undisciplined. They desire things that feel good, not necessarily what is right or moral.
So the goal of the family or the government is to instill discipline, to make them good.
Precisely. Moral authority is necessary. The father, the leader, must be strong to protect the family from that dangerous world. And punishment is required to teach discipline. If you spare the rod, you spoil the child.
Okay, I can see that regarding, say, crime and punishment. But how does this translate to economics? Why does a strict father care about the free market?
This is where it gets fascinating. It links morality directly to prosperity. It goes back to Adam Smith, but it's filtered through this family metaphor. The idea is that if you are disciplined and you pursue your self-interest in the market, you will become prosperous.
So if you're rich, it's because you were disciplined, you were good, you did the right thing.
Yes, wealth is a marker of moral discipline. Conversely, if you are poor, it indicates a lack of discipline. You were bad, or at least lazy. You didn't try hard enough.
Whoa. So when we talk about social programs, welfare, food stamps, universal health care, in this worldview, those aren't just expensive, they're actively immoral.
Yes, that is the critical shift in understanding. If you give a child something they didn't earn, you are spoiling them. You are robbing them of the discipline they need to survive in a dangerous world. You are making them dependent and weak.
So from that perspective, cutting taxes on the rich isn't just an economic policy.
It's a moral one. You are rewarding the disciplined, good children. And cutting welfare is also moral, because you are forcing the undisciplined children to grow up and learn to fend for themselves.
That explains why the arguments about compassion often fall flat. The strict father model thinks that tough love is the most compassionate thing you can do.
It's the only real compassion there is in that worldview. Now, let's flip it. The nurturant parent model. This is usually associated with progressive politics.
And I assume this isn't just let the kids do whatever they want, because that's how it's often portrayed.
No, though the strict father model often caricatures it that way. The nurturant parent model assumes that children are born good and can be made better. The world is not just a battleground, it can be improved. The core values here are empathy and responsibility.
Empathy meaning caring for others, but what about responsibility?
Responsibility means acting on that empathy. The logic is that you must take care of yourself so you can take care of others, like the oxygen mask on a plane. But more importantly, if you empathize with someone, you have a responsibility to help them.
So the values are different.
Totally different.
Yeah.
The values are protection, not just from evil, but from pollution, from corporate greed, from poverty. It's a much broader definition of harm.
So in this model, a regulation on a bank isn't interference in the free market. It's protection.
Correct. It's protecting the family from harm. And social programs aren't spoiling the child. They're providing the nourishment needed for the child to reach their potential. Fairness, fulfillment, and open communication are the pillars here.
So when these two models clash in politics, it's not just a disagreement over line items in a budget. It's two different universes.
It is a clash of moral worlds. One side sees the government as a nurturant parent who should ensure everyone has enough to eat. The other sees the government as a strict father who's become weak and permissive, ruining the moral character of the nation.
Now, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I don't fit perfectly into either of these. And I bet a lot of our listeners feel the same way. We hear about the middle constantly in election coverage. Where does the moderate fit into all this?
This is one of Lakoff's most controversial and I think most important points. He argues there is no such thing as a moderate ideology. There is no middle of the brain.
Wait, hang on. That sounds wrong. I mean, most people call themselves moderates.
They do, but what does that actually mean neurologically? Lakoff says the middle is a statistical fiction. What actually exists is biconceptualism.
Biconceptualism.
Good.
Two concepts.
Yes. Most people have both family models in their heads. The neural circuitry for the strict father and the nurturant parent were both there. But, and this is key, they apply them in different domains of their life.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, take a union worker who votes conservatively. At work, in the union hall, he operates on a nurturant parent model. Solidarity, we take care of each other, collective bargaining is good for everyone. But then he goes home and is a strict father with his kids, strict discipline, my house, my rules.
Or maybe the reverse.
Or maybe he's a strict father regarding crime and foreign policy, but a nurturant parent regarding the environment because he loves hunting and fishing and wants to preserve nature for his grandkids.
So he's not a moderate blending the two. He's flipping a switch, depending on the topic.
Exactly. And the mechanism in the brain for this is called mutual inhibition. When one neural circuit is active, the other is turned off. They can't both run the show at the same time regarding the same specific issue. You can't simultaneously think discipline is the only way and empathy is the only way about the exact same policy.
So the political implication is huge. If you were trying to win over a voter, this swing voter, you shouldn't try to move to the center.
Right, and this is where most campaigns fail, according to Lakoff. They try to sound moderate by using a little bit of the other side's language. But if you use the other side's language, you activate their frame in the voter's brain. You are literally waking up the strict father circuit in that biconceptual voter's head.
So if I'm a progressive trying to win a conservative-leaning voter, I shouldn't say we need to be tough on crime, but also nice. I should just lean into the nurturant frame.
You need to activate the part of their brain that already agrees with you. You need to trigger their nurturant circuit so strongly that it inhibits the strict circuit. You don't argue them out of their position, you wake up the other position that is already sleeping in their head.
That brings us to a term Lakoff uses that sounds like a medical diagnosis, but it's actually a linguistic one. Hypocognition.
It is a profound concept. Hypocognition is the lack of a concept or a word to describe a reality. It means you literally cannot know something because you don't have the frame for it.
He uses the example of the Tahitians, right? This one really stuck with me.
Yes. Anthropological studies showed that Tahitians had no word or concept for grief or sorrow. So when they lost a loved one, they felt the physical pain, the lethargy, the sadness. But because they had no ritual or frame for grief, they experienced it as a strange sickness.
They thought they were being attacked by demons or spirits.
Exactly. And it led to high suicide rates because they couldn't process what was happening to them. They lacked the tool, the word, to handle the reality.
So bring that into politics.
If you don't have a concise frame, a phrase like tax relief, you suffer from hypocognition. You might have a vague sense that something is wrong or that a policy is good, but if you need a 3-paragraph essay to explain it and the other side has a 2-word slogan, you lose.
Can we think of a modern example, something people might recognize?
Well, think about the concept of burnout. Before the 1970s, that term didn't really exist in the popular lexicon.
Yeah.
People just thought they were weak or crazy or failures if they collapsed from work stress.
Right.
Once the term burnout was framed, Suddenly people could say, oh, I'm not a bad person, I'm suffering from a systemic overload. The frame allowed them to perceive the reality and then deal with it.
So in politics, Lakoff argues that progressives often suffer from hypocognition. They haven't built the simple, powerful frames.
Right, and if you lack the language, you lack the perception. And the other side gets to define reality for you.
This ties into the difficulty of talking about things like climate change. Lakoff talks about the difference between systemic and direct causation. This feels like the biggest hurdle we face as a species right now.
It is a profound evolutionary problem. Our brains, human brains, evolved to understand direct causation. I pick up a rock, I throw the rock hits the tiger, cause and effect. It's immediate, local, and visible.
But the biggest problems we face now, global warming, economic inequality, pandemics, they're not like that.
Not at all. These are all systemic causation. They involve complex feedback loops, time delays, and probabilistic outcomes. The cause might be emitting carbon in 1950, and the effect is a hurricane in 2024. No language on Earth has a simple grammar for that.
So when scientists say there's a high degree of probability that the storm was exacerbated by atmospheric conditions, the public just hears noise.
Worse than noise, they hear weasel words.
Mm-hmm.
To a brain that's built for direct causation, probability sounds like you don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't trigger the cause and effect frame.
So the facts just float there, unattached to anything.
Exactly. Without a systemic causation frame firmly planted in our culture, facts about global warming just confuse people. They don't feel true in the way getting punched in the nose feels true.
So let's map this system out. We've got the cognitive mechanics, the synapses, the family models. But this didn't just happen by accident. Who is pulling the levers? Who built this system?
Lakoff is very explicit about the history here. He points to the architects. In the early 1970s, conservatives, specifically the pro-business right, felt they were losing the culture. Lewis Powell wrote a famous memo basically saying the business community was under attack from the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, the universities.
And he said they needed to fight back.
He said they needed to build infrastructure. And they didn't just buy ads. They treated it like a long-term engineering project.
So the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, those places.
Right. And George Mason University law programs. They invested in intellectuals who would generate the ideas and, crucially, the language. They understood that you have to change the frame before you can change the policy.
Let's look at the feedback loops. Lakoff describes this cycle. Language shapes brain. Brain shapes perception. Perception shapes policy, and policy shapes reality.
It's a loop of reflexivity. It's a system that feeds itself. Let's trace it with a specific example he uses constantly. Tax relief.
Okay, let's deep dive on tax relief because it's a masterclass in framing.
It really is. First, think about the word relief. For there to be relief, there must be an affliction, a pain, a burden.
So by just saying the words tax relief, you are presupposing that taxes are a pain or an injury. You aren't saying it explicitly. It's just embedded in the word.
It's smuggled into the conversation. And if there is an affliction, there must be a victim, the taxpayer. And crucially, there must be a hero, the person providing the relief.
The tax cutter.
Right. Now, what happens if a politician tries to stop the tax cut?
They become the villain. They are the person trying to keep the affliction in place. They want you to suffer.
Precisely. So a moment a progressive stands up and says, I am against this tax relief plan, they have walked right into the trap. They're literally saying to the voter, I am against relieving your pain.
Because they accepted the frame of relief, they're arguing on the other side's terms.
They've lost before they even started the debate. Lakoff argues they should be using a different frame entirely. Talk about tax investments or public dues or paying your subscription to America. But because they lack that ready-made frame hypocognition again, they lose the argument.
And this loops back to reality. The relief frame gets the tax cut passed.
Right. Then the government loses revenue, public services decline, the schools get worse, the roads crumble. And here is the kicker. This new reality reinforces the strict father frame that government doesn't work.
Wow.
The frame made the reality true. The failure of the government becomes the proof that the frame was right all along.
That is a terrifyingly effective system. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy engine.
It is, and we see it everywhere. Another example Lakoff highlights is from the Bush years, the permission slip.
Oh, this one always makes me laugh, darkly. It sounds like something for a school field trip.
It was brilliant and devastating framing. In the 2004 State of the Union regarding the Iraq War, Bush said, "We do not need a permission slip to defend America."
It sounds tough, it sounds independent and like a strong leader.
But look at the metaphor. It activates the strict father-adult-child hierarchy. Who asks for a permission slip?
A school child.
And who do they ask?
Yeah.
A teacher or a parent? Bush was framing the U.S. as the adult. The United Nations and other countries were framed as mere school teachers or, obstructions. An adult doesn't ask a child for permission to protect the family.
It completely bypasses the concept of international law or treaties. It makes it about maturity and authority. It's a power move.
Exactly. It triggered the neural circuit that says, we're the authority here. It made the UN look silly and bureaucratic without ever having to argue the merits of the UN Charter.
We also have to talk about Orwellian language. This is where Frank Luntz comes in.
Ah, yes, Frank Luntz. He's a pollster and strategist who is an absolute master of this. Lakoff points out that when a political position is weak or unpopular, the strategy is often to use language that supplies the exact opposite of what the policy actually does.
Like the Clear Skies Initiative.
Which was a policy to loosen pollution regulations. Or healthy forests, which was a plan for increased logging.
It's so cynical, it's basically lying.
It is, but Lakoff says it's also a map. It signals weakness. If they have to call it clear skies when it increases smog, they know the public actually hates smog. It reveals where their own framing is vulnerable.
So they're using nurturant language to sell strict father policies.
Exactly. Clear, healthy, those are nurturant parent values. They're borrowing them to cover for deregulation, which is a strict father policy.
So moving to the present day, or at least the implications for the modern era, Lakoff talks about the private depends on the public gap. This feels like another massive blind spot we have.
This is a huge instance of hypocognition in our culture. We simply don't have the neural wiring to see it easily. We tend to think of private enterprise and individual success as existing in a vacuum, the self-made man.
Right. I built this business in my garage all by myself.
But Lakoff points out the reality. Private enterprise relies entirely on public resources. You can't run a delivery business without roads. You can't have e-commerce without the internet, which, remember, started as a government DARPA project.
You can't enforce contracts without the court system?
You can't have educated employees without public schools. The list goes on and on.
But because we don't frame it that way, we don't call taxes subscription fees for civilization or investment in our shared infrastructure,
Wow.
we don't perceive it.
It remains invisible. And because it's invisible, we allow that infrastructure to crumble. We cut the funding because we think it's waste, and then we wonder why our businesses are struggling with supply chains and uneducated workers.
Then there's corporate personhood. This brings us to Citizens United. This is a legal concept, but Lakoff says it's actually a metaphor collision.
This is a perfect storm. We have two powerful metaphors colliding in the American brain. First, institutions are persons. We use this all the time without thinking. Apple is worried about sales. The White House is angry. BP apologized. We attribute human traits to organizations.
Okay, so we see the corporation as a guy, a person.
And the second metaphor, money is speech. In a capitalist society, how you spend your money expresses your values. If I donate to a charity, that speaks to my character.
So if corporations are persons and money is speech.
Then restricting how a corporation spends its money is restricting a person's free speech. That is the logic that gave us Citizens United. It wasn't a legal inevitability. It was a cognitive framing victory. It completely reshaped the power dynamics of American democracy based on a metaphor.
That is wild to think about. A metaphor changed the flow of billions of dollars in elections. It shows how dangerous it is to let these frames run on autopilot.
It shows the power of the system. If you accept the metaphor, you are almost forced to accept the conclusion.
Lakoff also applies this to foreign policy, specifically the rational actor failure. We touched on this in the intro, but let's go deeper.
Right. So in the lead up to the Iraq War, the U.S. foreign policy establishment was operating on the rational actor model. This assumes that nations act like businesses. They want to maximize assets and minimize costs.
So we thought, we'll go in, shock and awe. They will see that resisting is too costly in terms of lives and infrastructure, and they will surrender to protect their assets. It's a pure cost-benefit analysis.
But the model failed to account for moral or religious motivation. Insurgencies aren't always rational in that economic sense. People fight for dignity, for sacred soil, for identity. The U.S. ignored the costs of civilian deaths because in the rational actor model, civilian deaths aren't necessarily a cost to the state's assets.
We were playing chess, and they were playing a completely different game based on a different moral framework.
And because we couldn't frame their motivations, we literally couldn't imagine a motivation that wasn't about profit or self-preservation, we couldn't predict the insurgency. We walked blind into a quagmire because our frame was wrong.
This connects to the terrorism metaphors. After 9/11, we had a choice of frames, didn't we?
We did. The visuals of the towers falling activated the metaphor, society as a building. It created this sense of instability. And initially, there was a crime frame. We talked about justice, perpetrators, trials.
But that shifted very, very quickly.
It was replaced almost overnight by the war frame. Enemies, military, victory.
What's the systemic consequence of switching from crime to war?
It dictates the tools you use. If you are in a war, you use armies. You invade nations. If you are fighting a crime, you use police, intelligence, and international courts.
So the war on terror metaphor trapped the U.S. into a military solution.
It locked us into a military solution for a problem terrorism that is often non-military in nature. You can't bomb a tactic. You can't shoot a root cause like social or political despair.
So the metaphor dictated the trillion-dollar expenditure for the next 2 decades.
It determined the reality for the next 20 years. Once the war frame was activated, suggesting a police action sounded weak and unserious.
This brings us squarely back to the channel theme, crisis in perception.
Lakoff's work is the textbook definition of this channel's mission. The big takeaway is that perception precedes reasoning.
We do not see the world as it is. We see it through the neural frames we have acquired.
And this destroys the myth of neutrality. There is no such thing as neutral language. Every single word you choose evokes a frame.
Illegal alien versus undocumented worker versus refugee.
Exactly. Illegal alien activates a frame of criminality and invasion. Undocumented worker activates a frame of labor and bureaucracy. Refugee activates a frame of humanitarian crisis and safety. You cannot talk about these people without choosing a frame. There is no neutral ground.
And if you don't have the frame to comprehend a policy, you can't choose it.
That's the hypocognition trap all over again. Power isn't just force. It's the ability to define common sense. If I can get you to accept my frame that the government is a strict father, I don't need to force you to cut social programs. You will do it because it seems like the only logical moral choice.
And that explains why the strict father model makes conservatives view social programs not just as inefficient, but as immoral.
Yes. If you view the world through a strict father lens, giving people things they didn't earn is coddling. It destroys their discipline. It makes them bad people. So cutting the program is a moral imperative. It explains the passion. It explains why they aren't moved by stories of suffering, because in their view, that suffering is the discipline required to make the person better.
So bringing this deep dive to a close, we really need to shift how we view politics. It's not a debate club.
No. We need to move from thinking about politics as policy debates to thinking about it as moral warfare fought with neural circuitry. And the big, maybe tough lesson is that truth alone will not set you free. Truth must be framed to be heard.
Lakoff also warns about slippery slope initiatives. What does he mean by that?
This is a strategic initiative. He uses the example of partial birth abortion bans. The goal wasn't just to stop a rare procedure. It was to introduce a new frame, that abortion is a gruesome murder of a near-term infant. Once that frame is established in the public mind, it becomes a slippery slope to banning all abortion. It's a strategic step to change the neural landscape for the future.
And finally, the concept of reflexivity. I want to make sure we leave the listener with a clear map of this loop.
This is the provocative thought I want to leave everyone with. Reflexivity. We frame the world. We act on that frame. Our actions change the world.
Yeah.
And then that changed world reinforces the frame we started with.
Can you walk us through that cycle one last time?
Sure. Let's take immigration. Step 1, language. You call people invaders. Step 2, brain. The synapses for threat and defense strengthen in the population. Step 3, perception. You see families at the border not as desperate people, but as a dangerous army. Step 4, policy. You build a massive militarized wall and treat them like criminals. Step 5, reality. The border now looks like a war zone. There is conflict. There is violence.
And step 6, the feedback.
The reality feeds back into the frame. You look at the TV, see the militarized border, and you say, see, I told you it was an invasion. The frame has created the reality that proves it right.
The map becomes the territory.
Exactly. And the implication is, if we want to change the physical world, the climate, the economy, the justice system, we first have to physically change our brains. We have to change the synapses through different language. We have to stop thinking of elephants.
A powerful place to stop. This has been a deep dive into Don't Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff.
a truly essential read for understanding the systems of thought we all live in.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for listening.